This is an article of mine that was printed in the Jewish Tribune on the subject of the Holocaust, entitled, "Why Did It Happen?" Coming events cast their shadows before them, said Wolfgang Goethe. 1773, we must not stay in this place. Jewish blood will one day be spilt here. I can sense it. I can feel it, presaged Rab Zusha Anapol. The place, Auschwitzim, later renamed Auschwitz. 1870, because of the sin of Geiger's reform Shulchan Aruch, a new German Shulchan Aruch is going to be written. It's one halacha, leave no Jew alive, said the Maggid of Kelm. 1881, Rav Elchanan Wechsler wrote a book, Azhara, about dreams he had had of Jews being rounded up, taken to concentration camps, exterminated and burned. 1889, Zuk Tehillim, say Psalms, I can sense that a man who will be even more wicked than Haman has just been born. Pray that he dies a Misa Mashuna, an untimely premature death, said the Shinava Tzaddik. The date, April the 20th, at the very hour of Adolf Hitler's birth. Hitler himself had been conceived on July the 20th, 1888, at Tisha B'Av. 1891, when the Jew loses his Torah, which is his very essence, he actually becomes like an imitative ape. And then the Goyim start to consider the Jew as being something less than a human being, literally worthy of extermination, an Untermensch, a subhuman, wrote Rab Naftali Tzvi Berlin. 1896, the English author M.P. Shiel writes a story about a future band of monstrous criminals that ravage across Europe, slaughtering and burning their victims' corpses. He gave the story the title, The SS. 1923, the Yiddish poet Uri Tzvi Greenberg penned in the Crucifix Kingdom in Malchus von Salem, anticipating the Holocaust, about a future European wasteland of Jewish agony and death, with corpses hanging from the continent's trees, its rivers disgorging naked bodies of murdered victims, its soil toxic with Jewish blood. 1925, men think that Berlin is the new Jerusalem, but the coming storm of destruction will emanate Davka from Berlin, wrote the Or Sameach, Rav Simcha Meir of Dvinsk. 1929, the 12 million of the Great War, that was World War I, that was child's play. The real thing will start in 10 years' time, stated the Chofetz Chaim. 1938, sword and slaughter are coming into the world because men fail to study the Holy Zohar, Rav Yehuda Ashlag. 1939, quote, the heavenly decree against Europe's Jews cannot be reversed, and it will be worse than that of the destruction of the Bayis Sheni, the Second Temple. Its like has not been seen since the world was created, Rebbe of Karlin. The key to all the events of history is Ein Poronius Bo La'olam Ela B'Shvil Yisrael. Many sources, the Zohar, the Vilna Gaon, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, Rab Ibn Yachya, etc., pinpointed the years 5698 to 5708, that's 1938 to 1948, as being years of ominous portent. Quote from the Torah, Vayikra 26. And the Lord will scatter you amongst all peoples from one end of the earth, even to the other end of the earth. And amongst those nations shall you have no repose, and there shall be no rest for the sole of your feet. But the Lord shall give you a trembling heart and failing eyes and languishing of soul. And your life will hang before you in doubt in the morning, and you shall fear night and day, and you shall have no reassurance of your life. In the morning you will say, "Oh, would it were evening," and in the evening you would say, "Oh, if it were only morning." For the fear of your heart which you shall fear, and for the sight of your eyes which you shall see, and I will scatter you amongst the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you, and you will perish amongst the Goyim, va'avadate b'Goyim, and the land of your enemies will eat you up, and you will have no stand before your enemies, and those that are left of you shall languish away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands. Unquote. Mizeh ro'av ulechumei reshef v'ketev meriri. They will be sucked empty by hunger, consumed by fever, and cut down by bitter plague, it states in Dvarim 32, Ha'azinu, to which the term ketev meriri, bitter plague, is translated by the Targum as poison gas. Hen am lavada yishkon uvagoyim lo yiskashev. Up until 150 years ago, the Jewish nation was not numbered amongst the nations of the earth. Quote, behold, a nation that will dwell alone and will not be numbered amongst the nations. Bamidbar 23. Assisted by their different language and clothing and the ambient hostility, the Am Yisrael had remained largely intact for 1700 years. Yisa Yisareni Yah Valamavis Lona Sanani. The Lord has sorely afflicted me, but he has not given me over to death, Tehillim 118. And Jews had no inclination whatsoever to mingle with Gentiles. However, in accordance with the ancient prediction of the Zohar, the year 5600, corresponding to 1840, saw the Industrial Revolution really take off, and a huge elevation in the material status of the nations, nowhere more so than in Germany. And it was there for the first time that Jews started to look up to the Goyim. Moses Mendelssohn himself may have meant well, but the message of his Talmidim, his disciples, the first Maskilim, was, quote, forget the Torah and anti-Semitism will disappear. And within one generation, 50% of German Jewry had apostatized to Christianity and intermarried. But the vast majority of Jews lived in the Pale. In 1863, Russia lost the Crimean War. Until then, there had been no changes in the agrarian system of Russia for over 1,000 years. In the cause of modernization, the defeated Tsars built railroads that connected them to Germany. And along those railroads came the first Hebrew newspapers, Hamagid, HaKarmel, HaShachar, HaMelitz, and HaSafira, printed in the Prussian presses of the Maskilim, and which railed vociferously against the Torah and its living expositors. Amongst these Jewish masses, the newspapers caused a sensation and were avidly absorbed. In addition, many Jews had been contracted by the Tsars to build these railroads, and a new class of wealthy Jewish poets had arisen, whose allegiance was neither to Hashem nor to the Rabbonim, a classic case of Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivot. Yeshurun waxed fat and kicked. In accordance with the warnings of Dvarim 28, heavens sent warnings that things were going awry, with the commencement of numerous pogroms and blood libels, such as the Dreyfus and Baylis trials and the Kishinev pogrom. These events caused the Maskilim to become profoundly disillusioned with the concept of assimilation, which even they now realized could not work. Moshe Rabbeinu had warned, of the rise of new gods whom your fathers did not know. Elohim lo yodoum, chadashim mekarov ba'u, lo sa'arum avoseichem. And in order to provide a severe test of virtue, the Yetzer Hara promoted, under the guise of Jewish self-pride, the creation of even worse banes than the empty shell of Maskilos: Biz, atheistic Zionism, Bundism, Yiddishism, and the Reform. Led by men and women such as Gretz, Sholom Aleichem, Gordon, Smolenskin, Lilienblum, Ginsberg, Sokolov, Emma Goldman, Homburg, Wesley, Weiss, etc., these leaders now took over the papers of the Maskilim. The Orthodox tried to stem the tide valiantly with underfunded newspapers such as the Halavanon and the Warsaw Tageblatt. The scene was now set for the greatest Torah defection in history. As with Titus, who was sent by heaven to destroy the disloyal elements of the Second Temple, it was a case of kamche trina trinas, pulverizing flour that had already been pulverized, Gemara Sanhedrin 96. And so it was with the sending of Hitler and the destruction of the Pale. It was classic Middah keneged Middah. From Berlin the rot had started, so from Berlin the destruction came. As the Jews tried to get lost amongst the Gentiles, so too were they tracked down by the researchers of the Zentralstelle, even back to the third or fourth generations. Because married Jewesses had exposed their hair for the first time in history, so too was their hair shaved off. Because they so revered the German doctors, so too did the German doctors experiment on them to the death. Because they were so enamored with German Gemütlichkeit, German friendliness, so too were the Germans permitted to show their other side, the dreaded Furor Teutonicus, which was already famous in the days of the Gemara, Megillah 6. Because they trusted in the secular Jewish leaders, so too those very leaders betrayed them in their hour of need. Wise, Sharet, Ben-Gurion, Henrietta Schold, Golda Meir, Ehrenpreis, etc. Their motto was, quote, "One Jew in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Europe," said Yitzhak Greenbaum, chairman of the Jewish Agency. Quote, "Palestine cannot be allowed to be flooded with undesirable Orthodox Jews," Henry Montor, director of the UJA. V'hayu ma'ashrei ha'am hazeh misoyim u'meusharav mevuloyim. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led by them are destroyed. Yeshaya 9. The whole sordid scandal came out in the infamous 1954 Kastner trial. Lama sabit bogdim. Why, O Lord, do you continue to gaze upon the traitors? Habakkuk 1. Yofa einayich yonim. Your eyes as beautiful as doves, it says in the Song of Songs, which the Midrash interprets that these eyes are the Torah leaders of each generation. Today, as in the past, when the masses in Israel forsake the leadership of the Gedolim and put their trust in the enemies of the Torah, then when their hour of need comes, then they too will taste the bitterness of non-Torah leadership, and they will not be favored with Hashem's approval. Chorev uri al roi, hach es haroeh usfutsen hatzaon. Awake, O sword, against the shepherd. Smite the shepherd, and then the sheep will be scattered. Zechariah 13. It must not be forgotten that the perpetration of the Holocaust required the full cooperation, einer in einer, of the German scientists, doctors, judiciary, financiers, press, railwaymen, Red Cross, church, and diplomats, in addition to efficient assistance from very many Poles, Slovaks, Croats, Romanians, Lithuanians, Latvians, Belgians, Dutchmen, Ukrainians, Frenchmen, and Bosnians. But not to forget that there were also some truly humanitarian non-Jews who assisted in Hatzolah. Raoul Wallenberg, Paul Gruninger, Oskar Schindler of the famous Schindler's List, Alexander Lados, the Englishman Nicholas Winton, Guelfo Zamboni, Felipe Bernardini, the Japanese man Sempo Sugihara, and even the fascist leader General Franco of Spain, and even Hitler's ally Carl Gustav Mannerheim of Finland. Despite her present prosperity, Germany has yet to be paid back in full for her horrendous crimes. Od ma'at ve'ein rosha, just a little longer, and then the wicked will no more be in existence. Tehillim 37. Germany's role in our nation's history may not yet be over, as in the future war of Gog and Magog, it refers to Gomer and all her armies, Yechezkel 38, which the Gemara states, Gomer is Germania. Some speculate that just as Nebuchadnezzar's punishment for destroying the Bayis Rishon, the first temple, was temporarily delayed because he gave tzedakah to the Jewish poor, so similarly has the punishment due to Germany been also temporarily postponed because of their Wiedergutmachung, their Holocaust reparations. But Boi Yemei Hashilum, the days of recompense are coming. Hosea 9. Germania shel Edom shel male hen yotzin machrivim es kol ha'olam kulo. Germany of Edom, should they ever burst out from their borders, they will destroy the entire world, warned the Talmud. Quote recently from the British astronomer Patrick Moore. The Germans started World War I, the Germans started World War II. Mark my words, the Germans are going to start World War III, unquote. When the Belzer Rebbe heard that his son had been thrown by the Nazis into a burning building, he exclaimed, "The Creator in his mercy has accepted my son as a korban." The very fact that Auschwitz still exists, that it was not bulldozed to the ground back in 1945, that all its gas chambers are fully intact and functional, just waiting to be reconnected to the infamous Zyklon B gas, is ominous. The current wave of world anti-Semitism and Jewish history has shown repeatedly that it would be premature to discount their dastardly designed use yet again, lo aleinu. The March of the Living, which is a rite of passage for Jewish youth today, could yet become the March of the Dying. And even elsewhere, Avigdor Miller stated in 1980, the Americans are capable of one day building better gas chambers than the Germans. For the Jew whose destiny is Olam Haba, the afterlife, assimilation and rejection of the Torah are worse than death. And it was a great chesed of Hashem that the Jews of Europe were taken out of this world before they had spoiled entirely. As to the question why the Orthodox also perished, one must unfortunately apply the Talmudic principle. Keivan shenitna reshus lamashris eino mavchin bein tzadik v'rosha. Once the angel of death has been permission to be unleashed, he does not distinguish between the righteous or the wicked. Gemara Bava Kama 60. Could the Orthodox have done more to bring the masses back to Judaism? Quote, the Torah world will one day have to give an account for why it did not establish a yeshiva in the birthplace of Leon Trotsky. Had there been a yeshiva there, he might have attended it, and communism would never have got off the ground. Alt of Novardok. There were cases when communist pamphlets were left in yeshivas at Ma'ariv, and the Rosh Yeshiva would wake up for Shacharis in the morning to find the yeshiva totally emptied out. The entire yeshiva having defected to atheistic communism overnight, with many of them joining the dreaded Yevsektia. The cruel torturers of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, and who demanded his execution even more than the Soviet Gentile prosecutors, were none other than his formerly Orthodox Chabad Jewish friends and Chevrusas from Cheder and Yeshiva. The Jews of England and America were spared visitation at that time because, unlike the Jews of mainland Europe, the Jews of England and America did not actively rebel against the Torah, but had lapsed into a torpor of ignorance. Never say that it could not happen again. Asher ein nase pisko maase hara mehera, al kein mole lev b'nei ha'odom behem la'asos ra. Because the sentence is not immediately executed, men's hearts are encouraged to do evil. Koheles 8. It is remarkable that atheists and anti-Torah elements are once again at the helm of the Medinas Yisrael, particularly ominously of education. The Jewish nation without Torah cannot survive for more than 4 generations. Rav Chaim Brisker. Vatishkach Toras Elohecha, Eshkach Banecha Gam Ani. Since you forgot the Torah of your God, I will forget your children. Hosea 4. Yom Evra HaYom Ahu, Yom Tzoro Matzuka, Yom Shoah u'Mashua. A day of wrath will be that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of Holocaust and desolation. Shoah, mentioned in the Tanakh, Tzfanya 1. In the last 3 hours before the Geula, before the redemption, it will be as difficult to cling to one's emunah, to one's belief in Judaism, as it is to climb a vertical wall of ice. Rabbi Yisrael of Regin. The tribulations wrought on us by the nations throughout the 4,000 years of our history have been terrible. Their crime has been in preventing us from being able to fully fulfill the will of the Creator. But the Goyim do not make history. It is the behavior of the Am Yisrael to the Torah that is the main determinant. For more on this subject, read A Divine Madness, A Defense of Hashem in the Matter of the Holocaust by Rabbi Avigdor Miller.